Hello and welcome to Epicenter Bitcoin episode 31. Today is August 4th and today's episode is all about Ethereum and the Ether sale which is currently going on. The first part of today's episode features an interview I did with Gavin Wood. He's the CTO of the Ethereum project and the lead developer of the C++ client. I recorded that interview last week on July 30th here in Berlin. The second part of the episode, I talk about the Ether sale from an investment perspective. I'll talk things such valuation, risks, and what's going to affect the Ether price in the future. So if you're interested in participating in the Ether sale, I hope that will help you with your decision making. Let's get started. I wanted to ask you something which I've actually never asked you, even though I've known you for a while now, which is when did you get interested in Bitcoin, and what was your sort of involvement with Bitcoin before Ethereum?
So I've been aware of it for quite some time. I think I remember years back when I saw a story on Slashdot about it. So I don't know if that was 2009, 2010, but anyway, I've been aware of it for some time, and when it got to 2011, I think I actually mined some, but I've looked all around for the backup of my home directory at that point, but I haven't been able to find them. Then fast forward to 2013, and it obviously hit the news a bit more. Especially mentioned was Kreuzberg. I think it was an article in The Guardian. And it was basically pointing out.
I remember that. Yeah.
There was like a brick and it was room 77, I guess.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
The first brick and mortar place to take it, and I heard it. I heard about the Silk Road as well, and I sort of thought it might be worth looking into. And I got in contact with Amir Taki. Through Amir, I met a couple of other people, and eventually through them, I met Vitalik.
What was it about the Ethereum project that sort of captivated you so much?
At the time, I was working on less motivating projects, let's say. I was working in the law software for law firms, and having to work with technologies that were difficult and morale sapping, really. So when I saw Vitalik's white paper, it was, as a software engineer, it was a breath of fresh air. It was something I could really sort of get my teeth into, something that was pure and nice, and that's basically why I took it on in December. It was effectively meant to be a nice little project over Christmas. There was obviously some aspect of wanting to see maybe this could be something more interesting than just learning Bitcoin. This has got a bit more purity to it. It's been a bit better designed from the ground up, and it does a bit more. But I was also kind of the scientist in me wanted to see if it could really, how fast it would be, whether it would work really. I would say a healthy dose of cynicism really brought me into the project and made me want to try it out. And
then I take it you you found your kind of questions to have positive answers.
To some degree. I think we're still working out a lot of the details, but I think to some degree I've brought to the project some of the fine-tuning, some of the alterations that the protocol kind of needed in order to become really more than what it is. Basically, I would hope that my contributions have helped to refine it into something that will make it down the line a bit easier for people to utilize, and therefore a bit more have a bit more promise in terms of bringing more applications onto it.
Let's kind of explain what Ethereum is. Can you give us a definition?
So Ethereum, first and foremost, is a platform. Most applications, if not all, that can be written on the Ethereum platform can be written on other platforms as well. They can be implemented on other platforms. In the same way that Bitcoin can be implemented without having to have the blockchain and the decentralized network. The notion of just being able to have a ledger that sits on a server and that people can interact with is really easy. There's no problem there. The problem let's say the advancement that Bitcoin brings is the fact that it's decentralized. And thus when some large organization, government, or a big corporation, when they want to say, hold on, you running that server, I don't want you to run that server anymore, or this is illegal. You're serving, you're arbitrating value transfer. That's illegal. When they come along, they with a normal server, with a traditional way of doing it, they can, of course, they have power over it. With Bitcoin, they have no power over it, and that's the key advancement Bitcoin brings. And so, coming to Ethereum, what it effectively does is it says, well, money is one sort of thing that you can put on a server, and that we can now decentralize. Well, let's make a platform for decentralizing absolutely any software, any service that we want. We can then decentralize, make it work based on the trust through cryptography, not trust because it's an authority. What Bitcoin brings to the table and what Ethereum sort of trumps is the notion that you don't need to be a server to have that position of trust. Everybody, all of the peers in the peer group can collaborate and form the trust among themselves. It's sort of like this notion of order through chaos rather than order through explicit design from some godlike figure. And so the platform for Ethereum is a platform that will allow you to make decentralized applications of the variety that we might currently think of as social contracts. So whereas money, cash, the clearinghouse, the notion of a clearinghouse, is a social contract, Ethereum allows you to introduce your own social contracts and allow other people to interact with each other through those social contracts.
Can you define a social contract?
A social contract is an agreement made voluntarily by a number of people who take part in a society. Now, it doesn't need to be a geographically limited society. It could be anywhere in the world. But the notion of a social contract is simply one that is about the fact that people want to play by the same rules and therefore be able to expect that everybody else is playing by those rules.
I think the sort of the idea of decentralizing, a variety of applications, I think it's very clear. People can understand that. It makes total sense to me. Like, for example, something like Dropbox, which is like an often used example. It makes sense to me that like you can decentralize that, and that's really interesting. But it's kind of what I find a bit strange and not necessarily so intuitive is why the idea of a contract is so central to make this possible.
Even the notion of a social contract is new in the world of technology. It should be no surprise to us. Bitcoin really introduced us, those of us who are technologically savvy, it introduced to the notion of a basic social contract. I can go to an academic department, one that up to date with the latest advancements in computer science, and they won't understand the implications of the blockchain, of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, of all the other projects out there trying to do this. Why not? It's because it's yet to be absorbed. It's yet to be fully understood, and it's still very much in its infancy regarding what the ramifications and repercussions are for society. It's almost like we've solved the problem, but we're not entirely sure what the problem that we've solved. But we know we've solved it. We know we've got somewhere. We know we've reached new ground, new territory, because the fact that Bitcoin is starting to cause. I mean, I don't think it's really got there yet, but is starting to cause such a sort of ground shift and a fuss in the establishment is one reason. But there are others. When you start sort of getting what the idea of this notion of an autonomous contract or an autonomous agent is, when you start sort of thinking about, hold on, well, if this is possible, maybe all of this other stuff is possible too. When that door starts opening, you start to realize, oh yeah, actually, this is actually something quite new. Something that we weren't able to do before.
If you sort of look ahead, 5 years or something like that, and like to speculate what those ramifications could be and what the world could look like at that point if sort of Ethereum lives up to its promise, what would you say?
Well, firstly, I don't really know, but I will make what predictions I can. There are many instances where people would like to collaborate with each other, and in some cases do. And for instance, in Italy, in the north of Italy, it's actually quite common for, in a village, a group of people who all trust each other to get together and to put in a large order to a farm, say an olive farm, and they'll get, I don't know, enough olive oil to last, each of the maybe 20 families 6 months. In the UK, this just isn't possible. People, there's a breakdown of community. There's people often don't properly know their neighbours. It's not like in an Italian village where everyone knows each other. So we don't have this level of trust. We can't sort of hand someone money and to do this for us and expect that they will sincerely and faithfully sort of return us our share of the olive oil. And so we have to sort of put our faith in supermarkets and centralized entities that have great that have their shareholders basically, and so they have to make profit for their shareholders, and so you don't get these cooperatives forming, and that's a shame because there's nothing intrinsically different about the people in the UK to the people in these Italian villages. So what we would like is a system so that people can trust each other. People can gather trust, or ideally interact and form agreements without the necessity to trust each other, and can put together these cooperatives, make systems and mechanisms of cooperation that don't require a centralized authority telling people what to do. You should pay this now, you should collect it now, you should go there. Ideally, that will just sort of form through the software, through something that everybody can know and see and understand. And that is what Ethereum and smart contracts and the notion of a social operating system, that's what it's going to start bringing to society. So when you say, well, what are the sort of applications, then it becomes a bit harder, because whereas the notion of clubbing together to buy some olive oil is a relatively sort of, blunt instrument of a social contract, people can understand it. But we will get much more nuanced ways of cooperating and agreeing with each other. And that's when it really starts to get interesting. So what might those be? The notion of an escrow is quite an interesting one. So an automated escrow. But probably the thing that's most interesting to me is insurance. So insurance companies at the moment basically act as a massive fat middleman. They collect a lot of premiums off a lot of people, and they make sure that their risk portfolio is diversified. And then when any one thing goes wrong, they can pay out and still make a nice tidy profit. Now, there are lots of people who like a nice gamble. But the point is that you've got these two sides of the equation. You've got people who want certainty and people who like to gamble. Well, one of the things that we can start to imagine is, well, why not just combine the two? Have an insurance contract on Ethereum that allows you to be paid out a large amount of money if an earthquake happens in your area, and have other people that want to bet in the opposite direction and want to win maybe a relatively small amount of money as long as the earthquake doesn't happen in the next day. And so you end up with a decentralized, autonomous insurance.
It seems like that would be such a complicated system to set up. Like, how do you have a price finding there, and there's a lot of expertise there that insurance company has, and that it seems to me that would be quite a challenge to accomplish that with contracts on a blockchain.
Firstly, there will be some degree of expertise, like what is the risk. But that can largely be left to market principles to work out. If more people are willing to bet on for this price, then the risk is probably overestimated. If fewer, then the risk is probably underestimated. And there will be ways of encoding, of effectively, selling or determining the risk through market mechanisms. So I think most of what an insurance company brings is firstly certainty. Mm-hmm. But again, that could be done. There's nothing intrinsic about that. And they bring, some degree of reliability. And other than that, they're just a massive computer. They employ a lot of people to push a lot of paper, a lot of pens, a lot of paper going around the desks. Now, yes, you're right. Coding it up would be, probably non-trivial. I've written a fair amount of software. I suspect it would actually just take 1 or 2 devs, not very long to do it. The key point is that once it's written, and that's it, it's done. And people utilize it indefinitely. Whereas an insurance company, they have to keep paying the people who work there to push the pens and papers around the desks, fly people around the world.
I guess another function would be the verification of the claims, but I guess that's also something where you could have a marketplace of arbitrators too.
That's the verification of the claims doesn't need to be at all. So if it's simply an earthquake happened in my area, I want my payout. Well, they can prove that they deserve a payout because they're on the contract as having paid.
You mean if there is some data feed that says there was an earthquake? Right?
So then you say, right, well, how do you prove that an earthquake did indeed happen there? And of course, then you need. So there are a couple of ways of doing that. One is a basket of trusted data feeds. Yeah. So then you don't have to trust any one data feed. You just take the median of a bunch of them. They all have sort of very sort of semi-trusted pseudo-trust. And the second way of doing it is what was called a shelling mechanism, whereby if enough people, so this is effectively decentralized data collection, and it relies on the notion that enough people will be telling the truth, such that, when people lie, they lie in a more random way, and so you're able to, through using averaging techniques, find the truth.
Of course, you'd still have, let's say my house gets robbed or something, then, you'd have to go to the police, they get a police report. I don't think the police will have a trusted API that speaks to the blockchain, but maybe in the future at some point.
That's quite possible. I mean, the German government has recently started releasing private keychains. So you can now...
for the government ID.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, sure, at some point in the future, perhaps if there's a society built on top of that, then you could have...
So all it actually has to be is the police have a private ID that they can sign a statement with, a digital statement.
Let's touch on one more thing, which I think is extremely interesting. When you talk sort of about the long-term or medium-term potential of platforms like Ethereum, which is voting systems, and the idea, I guess, also of having DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations. Can you explain a bit how those work?
Whatever is possible with Ethereum is possible today, as long as you give up the notion of it being decentralized and autonomous. So there's a notion of having an organization. Now, the organization has a bunch of people that in some way cooperate for the greater good of the organization, doing whatever it does. If it's an NGO, then it's presumably helping people. If it's an enterprise, then it's presumably making money for its owners. Now, as soon as you make it decentralized and autonomous, what you're basically doing is saying, we won't have any person running it. We won't have a hierarchical structure. We won't have someone in charge. We won't have the chain of control, the chain of command. Rather, we will say that the organization should exist purely based on a set of rules of interaction, which is to say, when people join the organization, they can be certain about how they will have to interact with other people, what changes will be made, how they will be made. Basically, it's a bit like you take the CEO or you take the sort of manager and you can read their mind. You know everything about how they're going to decide something, who they're going to listen to, what they're thinking in terms of what they really want, how they're going to approach problems, their strategy. That's basically what the blockchain allows you to do. So you can think of this as a contract or an interconnected set of contracts because it's rule-oriented.
It seems to me that this may work well in sort of a clear-cut world where it's clear what rules you need, but it seems like, in the real world, there's a lot of ambiguity. Do you think that's a problem for DAOs?
In the real world, there is ambiguity in terms of what it is that we mean. Natural language is necessarily a bit ambiguous. And we are imperfect beings. We don't always interpret the rules as they were meant to be interpreted. When you're in a computer system, when you're in a mathematically formalized system, that just goes out of the window. It's perfect. It has to be perfect. It has to be deterministic. It has to be exactly perfectly specified. So in the real world, we have, through necessity, things like reasonable and in the spirit. We don't have that. We can't take that we can take it into the computer world with us, but there's no need. It's forced on us in the real world. It's not forced onto us in the computer world, and therefore we can up front actually specify the rules and specify them in a perfectly deterministic and perfectly understandable way.
That seems to me sort of argue the problem away in a strange way. I mean, it seems ambiguity is often... it just seems like ambiguity is part of our life. You won't be able to write contracts that... perhaps the contracts themselves can be unambiguous, but it seems like that then they may just conflict with an ambiguous world.
So within a computer system, the lowest level of representation is the binary digit. It can be either 1 or 0.
Sure, I know a computer program will be not ambiguous. There won't be ambiguity in an Ethereum contract. But my point is that if you talk about replacing a company with unambiguous code, it seems like a lot of the things a CEO does every day is deal with ambiguity in ambiguous situations. And it just seems like to replace a CEO's role with unambiguous, sort of clear-cut deterministic code, that just seems impossible to me.
So a CEO's job is to make decisions.
Yeah.
Now, there is, being the real world, of course, I think probably what you're getting at is that there is imperfect information for him to make such decisions. But nonetheless, when he makes decisions, he makes unambiguous decisions, or at least if he's a good CEO, he makes unambiguous decisions. Let's do that maybe. That's an ambiguous decision. That's not a good decision. A CEO will say, right, this is the strategy. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do the other thing. And specify that in a very unambiguous way. Now, in the real world, there is a lack of certain information a lot of the times, and translated into Ethereum, you can't have more information than is in the real world. But I suppose the point is that will be encoded in such a way that when the Ethereum contract or DAO deals with it, it will know what the limits of that information are. So it will know the, percentage error margins on what this is coming in. Yes, there will be grey areas, but there'll be very well-defined grey areas. If the risk is high that this is not the case, then it will be specified that the risk is high and it's not the case, and the DAO will be programmed in order to understand what that risk is, understand the likelihood and the probabilities and the uncertainties involved, and still deterministically and perfectly make a decision. concerning it that isn't ambiguous.
So let me try to run through sort of an example of what that could look like, that I think people can relate to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? But so a company that sort of talked about a lot in the Bitcoin cryptocurrency space is Kickstarter, because I guess a lot of people are interested in how you can replicate those in a decentralized way. So if you had like a Kickstarter DAO, it would somehow have rules on how to submit the project to the platform. Perhaps there would be some sort of mechanism by which people are asked to, approve projects. Maybe there will be people who vote on it with their reputation, say, is this a project we want to have on the platform? Then it would have defined rules on how people can fund the projects, and what they would be given some token or some reward that they can later claim. Maybe you would have some sort of reputation system that afterwards people can vote on whether the people who created the projects were trustworthy, so that in the future, if they have another one, you can look at the history. Maybe there would be some escrow function somewhere, so that you'd have the structure where essentially you can sort of do what Kickstarter does, which is people submit projects, get them funded, and then they give back a reward or something to the participants without having that centralized organization that says which projects are okay on the platform and takes 5%.
Yes.
So that's that about.
So I think the most important thing is the final it was the final point there, that you don't need the central organization to tell you what you can do, right, and to take money for taking that. Yeah, for doing that. And that's really what it all comes down to.
Of course, you still have, for example, Kickstarter, all the work they do in the user interface, website, etc.
Again, that only needs to be done once. So it's not clear why they should get 5% of everything.
So let's talk a little bit about the sort of components of Ethereum. Maybe we don't have to go into a lot of detail here, but I know there are a lot of different things that have to be in place for people to be able to build applications on this and for Ethereum to work. Can you go into this a little bit? And I know perhaps at the core there will be an Ether browser, no?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good place to start, or you want to, or maybe there will also be an app store, no?
Indeed. There'll be, so Ethereum can be described as one of three components to what people have been calling the post-Snowden web, or Web 3.0. But this is basically the notion of having a decentralized web. So with a new web, there'll be a new web browser, and this web browser would be, you can think of it as a wallet, but a wallet with an HTML window, or you can think of it as a browser, but a browser that has Ethereum running in its back end. Now, in addition to Ethereum, there'll be two other technologies. One would be effective to allow individuals to communicate with each other, but they don't need to without any necessity for agreement. So there's no notion that you have to remember what the other person said, or that everybody needs to be able to form consensus on what you two are saying to each other. It's just a way for you to do communications, kind of like the internet. The internet is to communications what Ethereum is to agreements. The third technology is something that allows people to publish and distribute information, generally larger bits of information, but also things like templates for web pages. The notion is that this information is stuff that doesn't change over multiple days or weeks.
So that's like web hosting, is that correct?
Kind of like web hosting. They're probably better thinking of it in terms of BitTorrent, so kind of like hosting a torrent file.
So if you have a decentralized internet, then where will websites be hosted? Can you host a website in a decentralized way?
Of course. I mean, a BitTorrent is a decentralized piece of information that can be downloaded from the internet. There's no reason why the information can't be an HTML file with a bit of JavaScript and images.
And would that be performance-wise competitive with centralized web hosting?
BitTorrent probably wouldn't be, but we're looking into methods of adapting the basic idea of that with optimizations that would allow it to be competitive.
But so when you talk about BitTorrent web hosting, essentially, I would try to load a website. I would be connecting to lots of peers that then would send me pieces of the website, and I would assemble it in my browser. Now, that's right? Or
as a basic idea, yes. Of course, the way that we're envisioning it is that you would already be connected to the peers.
Yeah.
And you would already likely have the peers that are going to give you the websites that you want. And therefore, it's actually reasonable. You may even have already got the websites because they're looking at them, and they've decided that you're it'd be a good idea to cache that one for you. Yeah. So it might be that you go to your website and the template's already there. So you go to your news site, and of course you've already got most of the template loaded, all the images and that sort of stuff, and you're just waiting for the content. And of course, then the content is distributed. I guess
that's a bit like Amazon, when they preload a page in the JavaScript or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like we have this sort of gigantic project ahead of us, of like an endless amount of, on the one hand, infrastructure components. So yeah, there's the app store, browser, also things that will be used by a lot of applications such as identity systems, reputation, arbitration, I think will be really important, although if there's no ambiguity, then maybe not.
I think you're right. I think there'll be a sufficient amount of ambiguity that we will need.
So how is that all going to be developed? Like what parts of this will be developed by sort of the official Ethereum team? What parts of it will be developed by independent developers, independent teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're so the official development team, or dev as we're called, I suppose it's Ethereum, but it's also Web3, so it's also the other technologies as well in the browsers. Dev will first and foremost develop the Ethereum protocol, the 1.0 protocol, as specified in the white paper and the yellow paper. That's its primary purpose. After that, it will start developing the tools, so the programming tools, the development environment, the browser. And then after that, it will, if it's got enough money, it will dedicate its resources to developing the other two Web3 technologies. So this idea of a peer-to-peer message, low-level, not something like email, but low-level messaging system, and the content distribution system. Now, of course, you're right to bring up the reputation system and so on. Now, we are hoping that we'll be able to address those as well. But if not, we've had real great interest from the community in terms of trying to understand. Maybe they can do it. Maybe they just want to sort of have a play around with it. But I think as time goes on, we'll draw ever greater and sort of greater crowds wanting to play around with decentralized applications. And these are really the sort of building blocks. The great sort of. There's a lot of There's a lot of potential to really explore this uncharted area by building these things. So I think that even if we don't do that, there'll be plenty of interest by others who want to.
Will people be able to profit from building applications? Will you be able, for example, to build, I'm going to do a startup now, and build a reputation system, and then I hope in the future, if it gets adopted and widely used, I will make profit from that. Is that sort of thing possible, or?
Old models of content creation are going to become increasingly outdated. So,
but this is not content creation, right?
Well, I mean, you could argue that the notion of a reputation system, a DApp software, is content, but the creation of information-based stuff.
Sure.
But then that's a different question to saying, can you make money from it? Personally, I think yes, you can. I think there will be an increasing amount of money made from selling one's expertise in certain areas, creating consulting potential. So if in this case, suppose you do create the reputation system and it's a really good reputation system, it's like, it gives you the ability to know that someone is, that this identity is 100% trustworthy, a real person, without giving away any of their necessarily giving away any of their privacy, that would be great. And if they could come along with that, I suspect it probably would get adopted. And then, of course, you get other people wanting to build on this infrastructure, and they say, right, well, wouldn't it be great if we could, get this person to instruct us? So they hire them, or maybe the person writes a book on how they did it and why it works, and maybe is instructive in terms of getting people to understand it and trust it and be able to use it better.
Sure, so, I guess a bit like Red Hat and Linux. No?
Exactly.
But I think the interesting example there, is if you look at the enormous impact Linux has had, like how enormously widely it's used, and then you look at Red Hat, which is maybe a successful company and profitable, etc. Yeah. Sure, it is, right? But compare that to Apple or Google or something like that, then Red Hat is tiny, So I think this kind of the thing you're talking about, of course, that makes sense, right? Like, so you develop some valuable piece of software, help people implement it, and I'm sure you can get paid, well for that. But it seems like the scope is totally different. There's no, there's just, you will never have the kind of magnitude of a company, and maybe that thing just won't be possible. I don't know, right?
It may well be that this is one of the things that comes from decentralization. Microsoft got as big as it got because it's a mammoth centralized entity, and that, in my opinion, was not a good thing for the information technology industry as a whole. It stifled innovation to a large degree for a long time, and if we look at, just to take that example, OS2, which is was a much better implementation in many respects than what it was up against at the time, and yet Microsoft, through the ability to leverage its industry weight using anti-competitive tactics, basically beat it out of the market. Now, and it's not just some random startup we're talking about, it's IBM who are peddling OS2, a massive, massive company. So centralization as a whole, yeah, sure, we might not, when we decentralize things, we may not see centralized entities making quite as much money as they, as Microsoft and Apple have done. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. And I certainly wouldn't say never either. I think it's, we will see a lot more of the Red Hat model, and a lot more of the Mozilla model, for sure. But you never know. There may yet be some more Microsofts and Apples.
Can you talk a little bit about Ethereum as an organization, about the state of the development? How many people, for example, let's start with that. How many people are working sort of paid full-time on Ethereum today?
I believe the figure is around 15 to 20.
I guess the fundraising is still going on, so you don't know how much money there will be. But where do you expect that to be? I don't know, in 6 months from now. You're exactly right in that the fundraising is going on, so we just don't know. But if the fundraising doesn't make more than 8 to 10 million, then dollars, then it's very likely that Ethereum will become a very, very slim organization indeed. Slimmer than today?
Considerably, yes. And there will be, basically all of that money will go to two separate organizations, the CCRG, a research group in cryptocurrency, and DEV, which is to say a organization directed by myself, Vitalik, and Jeff, the Go developer. And it will be up to us three to create basically what I've just told you, the Web3 software. So along with a bunch of other developers, and I would hope in 6 months' time that we'll have scaled to maybe 15 or 20 full-time developers, a couple of administrators, a couple of nice hubs, and 1 or 2 people involved in education and communication.
Well, Gavin, thanks so much. I hope people will check out Ethereum, and I hope we will see a lot of really exciting things coming out of the project.
Thank you, Brian. Pleasure to talk.
So I hope that gave you guys a bit of an impression of what Ethereum is, what the platform's goals are, and where we are kind of in the stage of the development. A lot of people are extremely excited about Ethereum. They think there's huge potential, perhaps even as big as Bitcoin itself. I don't know if that's true, but I'm also excited about the platform, and I'm extremely excited to see where Ethereum goes in the future. I want to talk about something that many people probably heard about, and it's one of the most important kind of milestones in the development of Ethereum, and that's the Ether sale. Now, the Ether sale has been going on for about 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks, and it's going to go on for another 29 days. And I want to talk a little bit about how to think about the sale, and if you're thinking of purchasing some Ether, so you'll have some kind of guidelines of understanding whether this is a good idea or not, and what the risks are and what the potential rewards are. The first thing I want to touch on before I kind of dive into the specifics is something really funny. So if you go on the Ethereum platform website, so ethereum.org, and you click on buy Ether, they have this long terms and conditions thing. And when you read through it, they talk about, you have to declare that you're allowed legally to buy products of a Swiss origin. It's like, what? Why is that product of a Swiss origin? So I want to talk briefly about why they do this and the legal side of this. Now, there have been quite a few projects in the Bitcoin community that have done things they've called IPOs. So they've sold these kind of securities or shares, or at least that's what they called it, on Bitcoin talk forums or on their websites and different campaigns. And it's quite important to realize that most of this is illegal. Selling securities, selling shares is a very, very regulated area. And one thing that you're not allowed to do in general is to sell shares or to offer shares to the general public. So we cannot just go on our website and say, hey, here's this Bitcoin address. Anybody who wants can buy Epicenter Bitcoin shares, and you're going to get like X% over future profits. So that's illegal. You can't do that. You can only do that, if you can only sell to accredited investors. It's a complicated area. But Ethereum is doing something a bit like that, but they can't call it selling shares because that's illegal. So what they've done is they've created a legal entity in Switzerland, in the canton of Zug, and they found some way with the local authorities there to conduct this Ether sale in a way that's not illegal. And the way they've done that is by saying that you are not buying securities, you're not buying shares of the Ethereum project, of the company, but you're buying a product. You're actually pre-ordering a product, and the product in this case is Ether, which is the currency that's going to be used on the Ethereum platform. Now, kind of economically, this doesn't really work like buying a product. It's not a typical product pre-order. It's actually much more like a share. But I wanted to get this out of the way. So if you see people, especially the Ethereum team, they always talk about, hey, this is a product. Now they legally have to do that, because otherwise they would be violating the laws. But as an investor, it's important to understand the kind of economics dynamics that are going on here, and they're much more like a share. So let's talk about what Ether is going to be used for. So in the future, there's going to be this Ethereum platform, and this Ethereum platform will be used to run decentralized applications to execute these contracts, have them executed by decentralized networks of computers, of miners. Now, if I'm going to put in a contract there and it's going to be executed by all these miners, then I have to pay for that. Of course, that makes total sense, because if I didn't, then I could just spam the networks, give it all kinds of pointless contracts, and people would get angry, and you'd have like useless computations running. And of course, you also need to have an incentive. You need to have an incentive for miners to actually provide their hardware, their bandwidth, etc., and essentially maintain the Ethereum network. We also have a similar security thing that you need to have a certain mining power, otherwise it may not be as secure. So Ether is going to be used for me as somebody who writes a contract, for example, to pay for it to be executed by the network. Now, the way this kind of works is that if Ethereum is going to be really successful in the future, we assume that there will be a lot of demand for people to run applications, contracts on the Ethereum platform. If that's going to happen, then there will be a lot of demand for Ether because you need Ether to run your application, execute your contract. So the kind of basic economic dynamics that are going on with the Ether sale is that if you buy some Ether now, and if Ethereum is going to be really successful in the future, you will be able to sell it at a higher price, hopefully at least, to people who want to run these applications. They need them, right? So you could think of that perhaps the demand for running these applications is just going to explode, and Ether is going to become much, much more valuable because so many people want it. That also, of course, means that computations will become cheaper per Ether in the future. So is this a good idea? Should you buy some Ether? I think the really important thing to understand is the kind of dynamics we have going on here in terms of how many people are investing in the project and what ownership are you going to have of the project. Essentially what happens is the more people buy Ether, currently about 12,000 Bitcoins worth of Ether have been bought, but this could increase. So the more Bitcoins people put into this project, then the more Ether are going to be created. Of course, in the future, right, if you think 5 years down the line, that means that if there's some amount of demand for Ether, if twice as many Ether has been created, that means the price of Ether is going to be half as much. So we have a basic dynamic that more people investing in Ethereum, more people buying Ether, dilutes your shares as somebody who also wants to buy Ether. So in that sense, you could say that ideally, perhaps, assuming Ethereum is still going to be built and successful, you would want to be the only one buying Ether. Of course, that's not the case, right? There's been hundreds or thousands of people buying Ether, but you have this kind of a dynamic that the more people invest, the smaller the share of the total supply of Ether that you own. Of course, there's another dynamic, which you could say perhaps it's more likely that Ethereum is going to be successful if they have more money, right? So if they raise no money whatsoever, assuming that, and they wouldn't be able to finish the code, then perhaps that would be terrible. So we want a certain minimum level of investment, and perhaps the more they have, the better they can make the platform, etc. Now, this may be going on to some extent. It is certainly going on to some extent. I know they will do things with it, the more Ether they have. But I think it's actually quite limited. In my personal view, I suspect that kind of regardless of how much more Ether they're going to sell, the current level of funding they've gotten is enough for them to develop their platform. And then it's just going to kind of be up to the competition, how well it works, etc., how successful it is. So that kind of dynamic of, you wanting to have more investment so the platform is even better, I don't think it's so strong here. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's actually a really good idea to buy at the end, right? To buy after everybody's bought already, or after most people have bought already. And so you have a good idea of what actually are you getting. Because if you bought some in the beginning, you had absolutely no idea whether you would now own 0.1% or 10% or what percentage of Ether you would end up owning in the end. Now, the interesting thing is that tomorrow, so that's Tuesday, August 5, the Ether price is changing. So right now, if you invest in Ether, you get 2,000 Ether for 1 Bitcoin. But on Tuesday, this is changing, and it's changing to 1,970 Ether. So essentially, the price of Ether is increasing, and you get less for your Bitcoin. Now, the consequence of that, of course, is that most people who want to buy Ether will do so before that date. So if you buy on that date, or maybe the day after, you will have a lot of information then. You will basically have a really good idea of how many people are investing in the platform, and you have a good idea of what percentage of Ether you will own, and even down the line what you will own. Now let's talk a little bit about the sort of monetary dynamics that are going on with Ethereum. If you think of Bitcoin, a really crucial thing that has driven the value of Bitcoin has been that idea, or has been that Bitcoin is limited, right? There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. So if you think of it, but let's say the world adopts Bitcoin, it becomes the world's reserve currency, then those 21 million Bitcoin have to be enough to satisfy this huge amount of economic transactions, of reserves, of wealth held in Bitcoins. So the only way for that to happen is if 1 Bitcoin becomes really, really valuable. So I think this has driven a lot of the development in Bitcoin. A lot of people have gotten into it because of that, because they understand that. Of course, also currently the value of Bitcoin, right? We're at something like $7-8 billion. That's really driven by that. It's really driven by the expectation of the future value. Now, with Ethereum, we have a similar but somewhat different dynamic. So, if a certain number of Bitcoin are invested, so let's just say it stays at the current rate, which is 12,000 Bitcoins. That means that 24 million Ether will be issued, or will be given to the people buying Ether, people investing here. Now, in addition to those 24 million, what they will also do is they will create 20% more of that. So that's 2 times 2.4 million Ether, and those will be split. So 2.4 million will go to the founders, and 2.4 million will go to a foundation. Now, the founders, of course, these are people like Vitalik, Gavin, who've been working on this for months, who've been kind of full-time diving into this for, I guess, up to about 9 months or something like that in the case of Vitalik. So those, they haven't gotten paid for the most part. So they will get some of that Ether basically to pay for their work, and I think also to pay for their work going forward, and give them sort of an incentive in the project. Another 10%, so another 2.4 million, assuming it stays at this current level, will go into a foundations. And that foundation will be used to pay developers and other staff in the future. So essentially that means that you are slightly diluted, right? Slightly more Ether are actually created than are being purchased. But it's not crazy, right? It's 20% more. And the other thing that happens afterwards is that every year, 26% of that amount that's purchased by investors during the fundraising period are mined. So let's say it stays at 24 million. That means that 26% every year are mined. So that's 6.2 million Ether. Now that's going to be the case forever, right? So every single year, 6.24 million are mined. So of course that means that your share of the total amount of Ether is going to go down every year. And, in the end, at least 1,000 years from now, it's going to be pretty close to zero. But in the sort of near term, it's going to be higher. This is, if we compare this with Bitcoin, we have a slightly different dynamic, right? With Bitcoin, we have a decreasing inflation rate. So we had, 50 Bitcoins per block in the beginning, then 25, it's going to go to 12.5, 6.25, etc. Now with Ether, it's constant, right? It's always 6.24 million per year. I don't know what that translates to per block. I don't know if that's been figured out, but, so it's not as deflationary as Bitcoin. But nevertheless, right, 10 years down the line, a lot of Ether will have been issued, and it's still 6.24 million that are mined that year. Now, of course, that's a much smaller percentage of the total amount of Ether that's been issued than next year, right? So in the first year of operation, essentially the inflation rate is going to be about 25%. And that's going to decrease every year until it goes, also tends towards zero. So the kind of point I want to get to here is that Ether is sort of deflationary, right? So, I mean, it has an inflation rate, but it decreases. It doesn't do so as rapidly as Bitcoin. And so it's perhaps not as attractive from that perspective as Bitcoin is. But I think it still has that dynamic that if a lot of people are starting to use Ether, it's not like the Ether supply is going to balloon. No, it's independent of how many people are using Ethereum. So you do have that dynamic that if Ethereum is successful, we will see a dramatic price increase, at least hopefully. There are a few more things I want to briefly touch on. First of all, I think it's quite similar to purchasing Bitcoin in many ways because we have a similar dynamic, right? It could become a really big platform, could be super successful, which would increase the price. And one important difference, of course, is that Ethereum still hasn't been issued, right? There's no working client. I mean, they have a test net, they're testing it, but it hasn't been sort of tested in the real world when real money is at stake. This means it's less proven than Bitcoin, right? It could be flawed. Perhaps we will find some terrible thing in there that just can't be fixed. So in terms of a risk level, the risk is obviously higher than Bitcoin, and I would say it's much higher than Bitcoin. So that's something to keep in mind. Of course, at the same time, we could also say the valuation is going to be very different, right? Today, sort of the value of all the Bitcoins in circulation is about 8 billion. Now, I don't know how many, what kind of an investment level the Ethereum people will get, but it's going to be way, way, way less than that. Now, does it make up, is the kind of increased risk and the better price you get, is that a good deal? I don't know. I mean, you have to figure that out. But at least fundamentally, that dynamic is there. What's also important to realize is that Ethereum is an open source project. So all the code is going to be public. It's going to be on GitHub. People can take it, can do whatever they want with it. Just like with Bitcoin, right? People have cloned Bitcoin. They've created Litecoin, Dogecoin, and all kinds of other things with it. The same thing will happen with Ethereum, right? The same code will be there and you can make other projects. I know it's actually has already happened, even though the live client's not out yet. There are people who basically want to do Ethereum, but instead of the money being owned by the people who purchase Ether, the money is just going to be given to all the Bitcoin holders. So that's a risk as an investor. As somebody buying Ether, of course, that's a real risk, right? So because it could be that the platform is developed, some people take it, maybe they're more successful with it, but then your Ether can't be used on that platform, and they become totally worthless. So that's a real risk, and it's something to be aware of. I think there's one big factor that Ethereum has kind of going for it, and that's something called network effect. So a network effect is essentially the idea that the bigger something is, the more powerful it becomes, and the more efficient it becomes. Now, money is like that, right? The more people use money, the more useful it becomes. Now, that makes it really hard for somebody who just shows up new and starts something small to become big, because the big currencies have an advantage already because of their size. Now, we have similar things in other areas, let's say Facebook, right? So if you want to be connected to everybody, of course, it's much better if a lot of people are already on the platform. That makes it hard for somebody from scratch to start a new social network because nobody's on there, nobody wants to use it. It's not as attractive. Now, we may have something similar with Ethereum, and we have something similar with Bitcoin, right? So with Bitcoin, the more people use Bitcoin, the more attractive it is, the more useful it is. And with all other currencies, we generally don't have the size of community of applications, etc. Now, with Bitcoin, what we have seen is that even though lots of people have cloned Bitcoin, have forked Bitcoin, have done sort of new Bitcoin variants, overall, they haven't been super successful, right? Bitcoin is still, if you look on CoinMarketCap, you can kind of see what's the total value of Bitcoin of all the cryptocurrencies, of the value of all the total value of all the cryptocurrencies. And I think the last I checked, it's about 93%. So it's pretty high. So you could say that all those people copying Bitcoin, it hasn't probably not affected very much the Bitcoin price. With Ethereum, we could have a similar situation. We could have the situation that a lot of people developing applications on the Ethereum platform. And because of that, the Ethereum platform is attractive and valuable. And it has these network effects that it's much more possible to do a new application on there because services are already there. And that makes it harder to just clone it and create something new and compete with it. Now, I personally think that these network effects will be present with Ethereum. So that is something that will protect Ethereum, but of course, there's no guarantee. It could absolutely happen that in the end, somebody just takes Ethereum, takes the work they've done, clones it, and maybe that's going to be more successful. I know one proposal I'm actually, or one project I find really interesting, sidechains, which is essentially the idea that you allow this kind of innovation that Ethereum is trying to do, but using the same monetary base as Bitcoin. Now, I'm sure somebody will try Ethereum on a sidechain, and if that happened, it's possible that the Ether wouldn't be used there, and they would lose value. So it's a risk. It's a risk to keep in mind. So I think that kind of comes to the end of it. I guess one thing I should interject here, which is that because Ethereum is not live yet, you can't actually buy Ethereum now. Essentially, you put in Bitcoins and you get a wallet or you get some file that once the Ethereum testnet, once Ethereum, the real thing is live, you can kind of import it and then you get your Ethereum balance. So also means you won't be able to trade it, right? So if you buy some Ether now and you don't want it anymore, well, you're going to have to wait until the actual client is out until you're able to sell it. So yeah, that's also kind of something to keep in mind. So I hope that gave people a bit of ideas of how to think about this Ether sale. My personal view is that it has a lot of potential, and of course it has a lot of risks. So I think personally, I feel like it makes sense to take basically a small portion of my Bitcoin holdings and put it into Ether. But I also think it would be very foolish to say, this is better than Bitcoin, so let me sell all my Bitcoins and buy Ether. I think that would be not a very prudent idea and extremely risky. So I guess I should also add a disclaimer because, of course, I don't want anybody to come to me and tell me, I was wrong. Or blame me if something goes wrong, and that is, please do your own research. Really look into this, look into Ethereum, think about whether this makes sense, and then be prudent and make your own judgment. Also, one thing to really keep in mind, and you should put a kind of high priority on that, is to make sure to take all the necessary security precautions when you actually buy Ether, if you choose to do so. Because, of course, if you lose the file or if it gets stolen or if you don't use good password for encryption or something like that, it's possible that you lose them. And, of course, that would not be desirable. So it's important to kind of do some research on that and be sure to store them in a secure way. So I hope that was interesting and helpful. So, once again, be careful, make your own judgments. But I'm really excited to see where this is going. Of course, all these things I've been talking about may not be so relevant for you. If the reason why you want to buy Ether is just to support the project and support the work they're doing, I'm sure some of you will will be driven by those motivations. And it's really important, I think, that this infrastructure gets built, kind of regardless of the financial prospects of the people purchasing Ether. So thanks so much for listening today. We hope this was interesting for you. I hope you learned a bit about Ethereum and about the kind of Ether sale that's going on, and about all the exciting things that are waiting us down the line with Ethereum and with other projects that are trying to take that amazing innovation that was accomplished with Bitcoin and with achieving a decentralized consensus, and that are applying it to a much broader range of issues. Thanks so much for listening. Now, if you want to support the show, you can, of course, do so by donating. We do very much appreciate that. And you can do that at epicenterbitcoin.com/tips. You can also follow us on Twitter. We're Epicenter BTC. And we do very much appreciate it, and it really helps new people find the show if you leave us an iTunes review. And now, finally, we send out a newsletter every Friday. And you can sign up for that at epicenterbitcoin.com/newsletter. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to being back next week.